Let me start this off with something most people never hear. A federal incident report that was never supposed to see daylight. It's nothing flashy, just a page with coordinates, a red circle drawn around a remote valley in Glacier National Park, and one handwritten note in the margin: do not reopen this trail until further notice. Thing is, nobody can agree on who wrote it, and the section of the map that's circled, it's still open to the public today. No warning signs, no explanation, nothing. But according to the man who handed me this document, a retired resource manager who spent 28 years in the park, something happened up there about 15 years ago. Something the federal government still can't explain and refuses to put in writing. He didn't come to me with some big dramatic moment. He said it quietly, like he was telling me where the bathrooms were. Whole section of the valley was shut down for 3 days, he said. Unofficially, of course, they never filed it as a closure. And that immediately got my attention, because unofficial closures aren't a thing. If a trail is closed even for a day, there's paperwork, public notices, radio traffic, all of it. But what he described was an internal lockdown. Rangers diverted tourists, posted temporary barricades, and were told to give vague explanations about maintenance issues. He said nobody on the ground knew much, only that whatever happened spooked the people who usually do the spooking. The location he pointed to is called Coal Creek Basin. Hardly anyone goes out there except backcountry hikers. This retired ranger told me that one morning in late July, 2 researchers radioed in from that basin sounding frantic. Not injured, not lost frantic. They claimed they found something they didn't have the vocabulary for. When dispatch pressed them, they stopped responding. A helicopter was sent in, but by the time it reached the basin, the researchers were found sitting on a slope, fully conscious, staring straight ahead, like they were watching something that wasn't there. No immediate injuries, no signs of a fall, no signs of hypothermia, but they were shaking and unable to answer simple questions. One of them kept repeating, "It wasn't supposed to be there." Nobody to this day will put in writing what it was. The ranger told me the incident commander locked down the entire basin before the helicopter even landed. They brought in wildlife officers, geologists, and 2 individuals who were introduced only as consultants from DC, not a title anyone in the park had ever heard before. The entire response team was told the same thing. Don't speak to the media, don't use radios except in emergencies, and don't speculate. When the team started searching the area where the researchers had been working, they found the tents still zipped, backpacks untouched. But the ground around the site had been disturbed in a way the ranger described as impossible. He said it looked like the earth had been pushed outward from a single point, like something erupted up from beneath the soil without breaking the surface. The grass was flattened in a perfect circle. No footprints going in or out, no animal tracks, no burn marks. Just a perfect, unnatural ring about 30 feet across. When he said that, he paused and pressed the map with his thumb. That's what scared them, he whispered. Not the shape. The fact that the soil was warm, like it had been sitting above a running engine. The Park Service wrote the whole thing off as a thermal anomaly, but Glacier doesn't have geothermal activity. That's Yellowstone's territory. Glacier is solid rock and ice. There's nothing under Coal Creek Basin that should produce heat. And the researchers? They were flown out that night to a hospital in Kalispell, then immediately transferred to a facility the ranger described as not local. They never came back to finish their work. Their project files were pulled from the park archives. The ranger said that after the federal consultants arrived, the entire tone shifted. They took samples of the soil, bark scrapings from nearby trees, and even vacuumed debris from the flattened circle, then packed it all in containers that didn't have Park Service labels. After that, they ordered the 3-day silent closure and told staff to stay out of that basin. When the trail reopened, nothing was said. No press release, no internal memo, nothing. You'd never know anything happened. But here's the part he said that still sticks with me. Every few years, it happens again. Not the same spot, but the same pattern. I asked him what pattern. He slid the map toward me and tapped 3 different points, each several miles apart. Perfect circles, he said. Warm soil. No tracks. No explanation. Most people would have stopped the conversation right there. But the retired ranger kept going, tapping that same circle on the map like he was trying to warn me without saying the words. He said the warm soil events were strange enough on their own. But what really pushed the staff into silence were the sightings that kept happening just before each incident. Nobody wrote them down. Nobody wanted to be the first person to put something crawling in an official report. But over the years, he heard the same details whispered from people who had no reason to compare notes. They all talked about a shape pale, wrong proportioned, and moving in ways that made no biological sense. He told me the first time he personally heard about it was in 2011, long before anyone connected these patterns together. A seasonal ranger had returned from a patrol near one of the river crossings at dusk, pale as a sheet, claiming she saw something crouched on a boulder about 30 yards away. Not a bear, not a mountain lion, those she could identify instantly. She described it as a white figure, but not white like fur. More like someone had dipped a person in chalk dust, stretched the limbs too long, and stripped away the normal mechanics of movement. When she raised her flashlight, the thing jerked backward not naturally, not like a startled animal, but in a spasm, almost like it recoiled from the light itself. 2 days later, the ground in that same area formed the first perfect heat circle he ever saw. He said everyone wrote it off as stress or shadows, but the story wouldn't die. Months later, another ranger, this one, a quiet older guy with 20 years in, mentioned seeing a long-armed shape slinking uphill at dawn. He didn't elaborate. He looked embarrassed even mentioning it. And that was how it always went. Respected people who normally didn't exaggerate seeing something that made them question their own sanity. They didn't use words like monster or creature. They just said it didn't move right. Too many joints. Too little hesitation. When the retired ranger told the federal consultant about these sightings during the Coal Creek incident, the man didn't react, didn't laugh, didn't even look surprised. He just wrote down the coordinates, nodded, and asked whether the staff had touched the soil ring before it cooled. That was the moment the retired ranger realized the consultants weren't there, because of the researchers they were there, because of whatever followed these heat anomalies through the mountains. He said the most disturbing account came from a trail technician assigned to inspect damage after a rough storm rolled through the northeast corner of the park. This was around 2018. The technician was hiking alone early in the morning when he spotted something white against the tree line. At first, he thought it was trash, maybe some tent fabric stuck in a branch. But then it moved, slowly at first, dragging one arm behind it like the limb was dead weight. Then it lifted its head, and the technician froze because the proportions weren't human. The head was too small, the torso too narrow, like someone took the general outline of a person and stretched it to fit a different frame. He said it didn't walk toward him, it unfolded toward him, rising from a crouch in segments, the spine flexing too many times. The technician didn't run. He backed away until he could get a ridge between himself and whatever that thing was. When he reached his truck, he immediately radioed in. The dispatch officer filed it as a possible injured animal, but marked the location. 3 days later, another warm soil circle formed only 100 yards from where that sighting occurred. That's when the retired ranger leaned in and said something that honestly gave me chills. He said, "The circles aren't random. They show up where that thing is seen, like it's passing underneath." He didn't say the creature made the circles. He didn't say it caused the heat or the pressure or anything supernatural, but the timing was too consistent to ignore. Sightings first, disturbance second, consultants third, every single time. I asked him why no clear photos exist, especially in a park loaded with cameras. He said they do exist, but nobody outside the response chain has ever seen them in high resolution. In 2 incidents, rangers retrieved trail cams that had picked up motion near the circles. What the cameras captured was distorted, low-light footage of a pale, elongated shape dipping in and out of the brush. Nothing definitive, nothing with a face or a clear outline. but enough that when they handed the memory cards over, the consultant sealed them in labeled pouches and said, "This won't be part of the public archive." The retired ranger didn't speak with drama. He sounded tired, like someone carrying information he never wanted. He told me the last time an incident happened, in 2020, he wasn't on duty anymore, but two former co-workers called him afterward. They said they saw something crouched at the edge of a clearing, just after sunset, a white figure, limbs too long, body too thin, head turning in short, mechanical motions. And right after it slipped out of view, the radios crackled with a directive. All personnel pull back from Basin 4 immediately. No explanation, just orders. Before the call ended, one of the rangers told him something he never repeated to anyone else. When they reached the tree line, the ground beneath their boots felt warm, warmer than it had any right to be. The retired ranger sat back in his chair and tapped the map. "Whatever this thing is," he said, "it's tied to the ground. It's always moving. And every time it gets close to the surface, the government shows up pretending they know what they're dealing with." Then he pointed to the valley circled in red ink. "And if it comes back to this spot again, that's when you tell people to stay away." The retired ranger didn't hand over the last piece right away. He sat with it staring at that circled valley, like he was deciding whether saying it out loud made him responsible for what happened next. Then he finally told me about the one time he actually went into a basin during an incident, the only time he ignored orders, and saw the aftermath up close. And that's when the whole story shifted from strange to something he still can't categorize. He said this happened in 2015, late August, during a stretch of clear weather. A crew of botanists radioed in early that morning about unusual ground patterns, flattened grass, warm soil, and a sound they couldn't place. Not loud, not mechanical. Something like a hum buried deep under the dirt, low enough to feel more than hear. Before dispatch could respond, the transmission cut out. Not static, not a drop, just pure silence, like the radio had been swallowed whole. Orders came down hard and fast, close off the trail leading into the basin, reroute hikers, and wait for the federal consultants. But the retired ranger was already nearby, working a different patrol route. Instead of pulling back, he approached from the north ridge out of sight, out of radio range. He said he wasn't trying to be a hero. He just wanted to see for himself if the stories were connected, or if the staff had scared themselves into thinking something unnatural was happening. What he saw on that ridge convinced him this wasn't a case of human imagination. The first thing he noticed was the temperature. It wasn't hot, but the air had a strange thickness to it, like standing over asphalt on a warm day. It shimmered. A soft vibration traveled up through his boots every few seconds. Not strong enough to knock you off balance, but enough to make your bones feel hollow. When he reached the vantage point overlooking the basin, he froze. Because down below, covering a stretch of meadow nearly half a football field wide, was a circle. Not a flattened patch like the others. This one was darker, almost scorched around the edges, as if heat had radiated outward. At the center of that circle stood something he wishes he never saw. He didn't call it a creature, didn't even give it a name. He just said it was white bone white, unnaturally tall, with limbs too long to be anything natural. It wasn't standing straight. Its arms were braced against the ground. At angles, he said, looked like a spider that learned to walk halfway upright. The torso was narrow, almost fragile looking, but the way it held itself made him think strength wasn't something it lacked. It wasn't moving, not at first. It stayed perfectly still, crouched in the center of that circle like it was waiting. The retired ranger said the worst part wasn't the shape, it was the silence around it. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed to avoid that basin. The creature's head tilted in short, unnatural jerks, like it was listening to something underground. He didn't breathe, didn't move. He just watched. And then, as if reacting to something below it, the creature's arms pressed into the earth. The ground beneath it pulsed an upward swell of soil that didn't break the surface but shifted enough to ripple the grass in a perfect ring. The retired ranger said the heat coming off that pulse hit him like opening an oven. Not burning, but heavy and humid, like the air had weight. The creature responded. That's the only word he used. It lifted one arm and dragged it backward in a slow, uneven pull, like it was bracing against a current. Then its head snapped toward the tree line, not gradual, not animal-like, more like a glitch in movement. It jerked once, twice, and then its entire body twisted in a sequence of short, stuttering motions. It wasn't walking, it wasn't running, it was retreating, but not in any way he'd ever seen something retreat. It folded down onto its limbs and scuttled across the basin with a speed that didn't match its size. No sound, no puff of dirt, just motion fast, wrong, uncanny. He said that was the moment he realized the heat rings were not separate events. They were symptoms, like footprints that appear without the creature leaving actual tracks. Whatever this thing was, it moved underground or partially beneath it, surfacing just enough to create these circular disturbances before slipping away again. He watched it disappear into the shadow of the trees, and seconds later, that low hum beneath his feet stopped. The vibration faded. The heat in the air vanished. What hit him next was fear, real fear. Not fear of being attacked. Fear that he had seen something he wasn't supposed to understand. Something the consultants weren't investigating. Something they were tracking. He tried to stay put, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. He backed away until he reached his patrol route. By the time he returned to the main trail, the consultants were already arriving by helicopter, wearing those same generic windbreakers with no agency patches. They didn't ask if he'd seen anything. They asked where he'd been, who he'd talked to, and whether he'd touched the soil. He lied, said he'd only just arrived. One of them stared at him like he knew the truth. Then he handed the retired ranger a clipboard and told him to sign a form acknowledging a thermal soil anomaly that required temporary rerouting. The ranger signed it, but he never forgot what he saw in that basin, and he never told anyone until years later, when he was retired, off the federal payroll, and carrying enough guilt to finally talk. He leaned forward and said the part that stuck with me the longest. That wasn't the biggest one. That was just the one I saw. I think there's something moving under Glacier that's bigger than that creature, and that thing is just following it like a scavenger, waiting for whatever rises next. He tapped the map again, and that valley, that's where it's coming back. I can feel it. When the retired ranger finally got to the part about why he brought all this to me, he didn't try to build suspense. He just laid it out flat, like someone who knows he's running out of time to make people understand. He said the sightings, the soil rings, the consultants, all of it was heading toward one place. Not metaphorically, literally. The warm soil events were migrating, following a path across the park that lined up almost perfectly with an underground fault line nobody talks about because it's been inactive for thousands of years. He said the consultants knew this. They had seismic maps. They drew their own dotted lines and circled the exact area he did. If this were a story about a creature in the woods, that would have been enough. But the ranger insisted the creature, the pale crawler, wasn't the cause. It was the byproduct, like something small that lives near something enormous. He kept returning to that moment in the basin when the ground pulsed and the creature reacted like it was bracing against pressure coming from a deeper source. He said he believed that whatever was moving under the park had been there long before humans showed up, and for reasons he couldn't explain, it was rising closer to the surface each time these events repeated. He opened a small notebook he'd carried for years, the cover soft from sweat and weather. Inside were hand-drawn circles placed over a map of the park, each labeled with a date. The pattern was unmistakable. The circles weren't random. They were spaced like stepping stones, gradually closing in on that single valley marked in red. And the most recent one, the one from 2020, was closer than any before it. I asked him point blank what he thought was under the valley. He didn't give me a theory about caves or magma or anything scientific. He said he didn't know, and that was the part that scared him. The heat wasn't volcanic. The pressure didn't match seismic signatures. The rings didn't follow erosion patterns. Everything about them was wrong. but wrong in the same way every time. And every time that white crawler appeared just before or just after the soil heated, like it was tracking the disturbance, feeding off it, or guarding it. He couldn't tell which, and neither could anyone else. Then he told me about a man he used to work with, a backcountry ranger, who left the job after a 2019 incident that was never recorded. This ranger was stationed near Bowman Lake when he spotted the pale figure at dawn, crouched near the tree line. He watched it for nearly a full minute before it moved. He said the creature had no interest in him. Its head was angled toward the ground, and its arms were splayed like it was feeling vibrations humans couldn't perceive. When the ranger took a step back onto gravel, the creature didn't even flinch. But when the ground beneath the creature shuddered a single time, just a tiny pulse, it whipped its head upward and sprinted away so fast the ranger said it looked like time skipped forward. The next morning, a soil ring appeared less than 200 yards from where he saw it. That was the last day the ranger reported to work. The retired ranger shut the notebook and told me the part that made him reach out. He said 2 months ago, long after he retired, long after he tried to leave all this behind, a former co-worker sent him an anonymous envelope. Inside were 3 photos taken by a trail cam. Low light, grainy, barely visible, but the shapes were the same. A pale figure crouched near the ground, its limbs pressed into the soil, its torso angled downward like it was listening again. In the 3rd photo, the trees behind it were blurred, not because the camera shook, but because the air itself was shimmering with heat. The coordinates printed on the bottom of the photos matched the circled valley. He didn't call the park, didn't call the state. He already knew what would happen. The consultants would show up, take everything, and pretend they had it under control. And the public would never know a thing. Because in every previous incident, the government's response made it clear they weren't researching a problem, they were containing something they didn't understand. I asked him if he thought the valley was dangerous. He said he didn't know what would happen if someone were standing there during one of the pulses. The heat could be harmless, or it could be the kind that cooks from the inside out. He didn't know what role the crawler played, whether it was a warning system, a parasite, or something drawn to energy we don't have a name for. He didn't know if the thing underground was alive, or geological, or something in between. He only knew the events were accelerating. Before he left, he pointed to the map one last time. "Don't tell people the park is closed," he said. "Just tell them this valley, this one right here, is a place they shouldn't wander into alone." He folded the map, slid it across the table, and said the sentence that stuck with me more than anything else he told me. "People think the danger in Glacier is the cliffs and the bears, but the real threat doesn't move above the ground. It moves under it. And whatever's coming up in that valley, the government can't explain it because they don't know what it is. They're just trying to make sure nobody sees it happen." And then he walked out, leaving me with a map, a story nobody will confirm, and a valley in Glacier National Park that, if you believe him, might be sitting on top of something waking up.